Hello, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I'm Larry Rhodes.
Hello, Larry, and I'm Joe Barnhart. I want you to know if you don't believe in God, you shouldn't be alone, and if you do, or if you're an agnostic, you shouldn't be alone. Right here in East Tennessee, you can find Freethought Atheists and Agnostics. It's a show for people who are having inquiring minds and free spirits, trying to think about life without the supernatural beliefs. Today is September the 24th, and this is a call-in show, and we invite you to call in, and you can see the number is shown on the screen.
Mm-hmm. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun meetup, often meeting at a bar or restaurant. Tonight's meetup will be at Barley's Taproom and Pizzeria right after the show for happy hour, for food, drink, and conversation. And Friday we meet for happy hour at the Beer Market. To find us at either one of these places, look for the silver-jacketed copy of The God Delusion standing upright on the table.
And please send us your feedback, voicemail, and the number there is 865-272-9060, or email freethoughtforum@yahoo.com. You can see this show on Tuesday from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern Time here in Knoxville. And go ahead.
The Rationalists of East Tennessee's monthly activities are the first and third Sunday mornings are usually lectures with lively roundtable discussions. The second Sunday is book club. The fourth Sunday is a reflections gathering, which is potluck afternoon gathering at a member's home. And today we'll be talking about how religion hijacks everything. But first, in the news. Atheism starts its first megachurch. The Sunday Assembly, the London-based, quote, atheist church that has since January's launch been stealing headlines the world over, announced a new global missionary tour. In October and November, affiliated Sunday assemblies will be open in 22 cities in England, Ireland, Scotland, Canada, the United States, and Australia. Quote, I think this is the moment, the Assembly founder Sanderson Jones told Salon in an email last week. This article comes from Arthur Bogacki via Shuttercock/Salon Online Magazine. When the Sunday Assembly goes from being an interesting phenomenon to being a truly global movement, he says. The Assembly has come a long way in 8 months from a scrappy East London community venture with the motto, live better, help often, and wonder more. Part atheist church, part foot-stomping good time, to the kind of organization that sends out press releases, and global expansion projects. The 3,000% growth rate might make this non-religious assembly the fastest-growing church in the world, organizers said. There's more to come. In October, the Sunday Assembly, SA, will launch a crowd-funded Indigo campaign with the ambitious goal of raising $790,000. This will be followed by a second wave of openings. The effort reads as part of a quixotic hipster startup and part Southern megachurch. One Sunday Assembly will launch in Los Angeles in December. We'll have a godless congregation in the City of Angels, laughs Ian Dodd, a 53-year-old camera operator for one of the chapter's founders, and one of the chapter's founders, The church model has worked really well for a couple of thousand years, Dodd muses, and what we're trying to do is hold on to the bathwater while throwing out the baby Jesus. The author says, I do not need to be sold on the idea. Like the Sunday Assembly's founders, stand-up comics Pippa Evans and Sanderson Jones, I don't think religion should have a monopoly on community. I like the idea of a secular temple where atheists can enjoy the benefits of an idealized traditional church. A sense of community, a thought-provoking sermon, a scheduled period of respite, easy access to community services opportunities, group singings, and an ethos of self-improvement, not to mention free food, without the stinging imposition of God Almighty. Evidently, I was not alone. A few months later, the Sunday Assembly was boasting of 400 to 600 regular attendees. As the news spread, Evans and Jones began receiving emails from all over the world from some would-be Sunday Assembly followers. Call us and let us know what you think of the idea. Would that work here in Knoxville? Back to the program.
That's an interesting. The word religion itself in Latin really means bonding.
Mm-hmm. Does it?
And so it doesn't have to be theistic. It may be theistic. It may not be. Mm-hmm. Here you have an example of people bonding. Mm-hmm. Everybody needs bonding.
Yes. Well, when you think about Taoism and Confucianism and stuff, it doesn't
Buddhism,
really have anything to do with about the afterlife or any of that. It's about people coming together with common.
Yeah. People need help and need each other.
Sure.
People need forgiveness, need hope, faith, love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Now, our theme today is religion hijacks everything. When you hijack something, you're taking something that doesn't belong to you and making it your own, or at least claiming it's your own. If I didn't paint a picture, and then I went over and grabbed the picture and started telling everybody that it was mine, that I did it, that would be hijacking that painter's efforts. And with religion, they seem to be on the hijacking terror for the last several thousand years. Religion tends to hijack society, taking society and dividing it with artificial denominations and supernatural belief systems that turn brother against brother. Catholics against Protestants, Islam against Jews, even Shia against Sunnis and other denominations of Christianity against each other. Orthodox versus Reform, that type of thing. And they form their own societies inside societies and say that the other societies are wrong.
Yeah, apparently that's a trait of the human species. Among anthropologists, it's called ethnocentrism. Our group has all the answers, and we're the true group, and then another group are strangers and aliens.
Yeah, but it's one thing to say that those people are wrong and we'll keep them out of our society. It's another thing to say that those people are damned to hell and that you are speaking with the voice of an almighty creator.
Yeah. And when I was in college, we had I remember a ministerial student. It was a good friend of mine, a nice guy, really. Mm-hmm. But he told this female friend of ours that he said, I think God is leading us to be married. That's what he said to her.
Was news to her?
She says, well, when God tells me, we'll do it.
What a great answer.
That was a great answer, I thought. And there's this, what's the program on Christian Mingle?
Find the mate that God has chosen for you.
Yeah. And but it's interesting that they have a way of saying, you got to help God out. You know?
Yeah, you better come here and sign in, or God will be mad at you if you know, or give you the wrong person. Again, they're speaking for God, or at least on His behalf.
Yeah, one of the things I think the reason that let me look at it sympathetically. That everybody's got to try to explain his environment in as broad a context as possible. And the human species started off doing this highly anthropomorphically. Mm-hmm. That's the way they explain thunder and lightning.
Sure.
And earthquakes.
Even trees and streams.
Yeah, they were personalized and personified.
Right.
And then the trees were spirits and had spirits, and the whole universe had a spirit. And God, or theos, is where we get the word theology, it was considered to be the great spirit. And that's the way they tried to explain everything.
Well, they projected agency into everything, whether it had agency or not.
And there was a tendency then to have a God person-like, and then God's character differed according to who was speaking. If you had a truly belligerent, hostile person, there's a good chance his God's going to appear to be. Yeah. And if you had a good-natured, kind, thoughtful person, his God or her God is going to be considered that way.
You can think of the Bible as the big book of multiple choices, because you can tell a lot by the person by what they have chosen in the Bible that they think is important
to say about God, or the community, Yeah. So in some ways, everybody is in a culture in which they're trying to explain the best they can, and so it's just almost inevitable that in various parts of the world they're going to develop different views. And then when they get together, they're going to think each other's a little strange. You know?
You have a much more benevolent view of some of these people. Like, let's take an example of an early tribe who was trying to make their way in the world and trying to explain things about, like, why the volcano's going off, why we got a storm yesterday that ruined our crops. There was a lot of people that will project agency to that, say that, you know, there's a spirit that did that or something. But then there's that person who stands up and says, yes, and if you don't do what I tell you, because I speak for that agency, he will come again and he will destroy your crop again or take your daughter or whatever. That's the kind of person that I have a problem with.
Well, and we should, and we have a history of that being done for centuries. But even in our 20th century, Jerry Falwell, you remember, thought that whenever the planes crashed in New York...
Said he thought it, whether he thought it or not.
Yeah, well, I'm assuming when he said it, he really believed what he said. But he was taking that to be punishment on America because of homosexuality or something.
Sure, and it's like, what is it, Katrina when it hit New Orleans. The same thing. Pat Robertson comes up and says, you know, it's the way that homosexuals are being treated in America. God is trying to punish them. It's that same type of mindset that I have a problem with.
Well, yeah, and it's because, first of all, they don't know this. They just... what it does, when people talk about God a lot, they're really talking a lot about themselves. And it tells you a lot about them. And you look at the kind of God they're talking about, and it pretty much tells you who they are.
So now, even, I mean, because the Bible says that homosexuality is bad, you can still choose that, you know, to preach that Jesus said, "Love your neighbor as yourself," and to take care of your neighbor and feed your neighbor and clothe your neighbor and kind of forget the Old Testament stuff. But when the preacher stands up and starts reaching back for the Old Testament when he's got a new one right there in front of him that he could just as easily preach from, then you've got to take some kind of measure of the man. For doing that.
And there's a lot of goodness in the Old Testament that is suddenly hopped over. Just hopped over.
Not only that, but also a whole bunch of abominations that's there that they choose to ignore as well.
Yeah, we don't burn witches anymore.
No, we don't.
Even though it's right there in the Bible.
We don't stone adulterers. We don't object to wearing mixed fabric cloth. You know, that type of thing. But homosexuality, boy, that's got to be punished.
Well, you mentioned, we'll get to that in a minute. You mentioned earlier to me that passage in the Bible to really become the disciple of Christ, you have to hate your parents, your mother. And
I was going to get to that here in a bit, but I'll mention the particular passage. We can go there now if you like.
But it's in Luke.
Yeah.
And Luke, in a later passage, contrasts love and hate. Now, what's interesting? Go ahead.
Well, I've got it filed under Religion Hijacks, a family. You'll notice that in the church they use pseudo-kinship words. Churches are very big on calling the other church members brothers, sisters, fathers. Actually, they're actually usurping and replacing the actual family members with those the church deems worthy enough to be in their assembly. Jesus very specifically said in Luke 14:25-26 that you should turn your back on your family if they don't follow him. And there went great multitudes with him, and he turned and said unto them, If any man come to me and hate not his father, his mother, his wife, and children, and brethren, and sister, and yea, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Now, this is very much something like any modern-day cult leader would say. Turn your back on your family if they try to turn you against us.
In fact, that's what the Moonies were into for a while.
Yeah.
I went up there and talked to them in the seminary, and I saw that they had young people, and I said they asked me what they could do, and I said, let these people talk to their parents on the phone.
Right.
You know, now, this passage in the Bible, most Christians do not take it seriously. They know that if you, and here, I looked it up in two commentaries this week. One was an evangelical commentary, and the other was what I call a moderate Baptist. And the moderate Baptist says, if my memory is right, is the one that says, this is not psychological hatred. In other words, what it amounts to is in both commentaries they're saying this should not be taken literally. It's a violation of other passages in the Bible. It's a violation of common human decency.
Right, but then there's, on the flip side, there's preachers and communities out there that say every word in the Bible is the absolute truth, and you should take it seriously. And those are the people that I really have a problem with. Not only that, but they say that not only should you turn your back on your people, your family, but you should not listen to anything outside of the church. Now, the Mormons are really bad about that. They like their little conclave. They don't want them to watch the news. They don't want them to read newspapers.
Yeah, some groups are very insulated.
That type of thing.
Yeah.
And
now, that's what's interesting.
they hijack their entire education.
In fact, you cannot have an education unless you look at other points of view. The very definition of an education is to get indoctrinated, if you want to, in one view, and then indoctrinate another view and another view to see what each view has or doesn't have to offer.
Right.
But until you look at it from the inside and think about it, you can't really judge.
Right.
If I say to you, the trouble with your view, it's not my view, that's not a very good criticism.
No, but one of the things about higher education, or any education, is they give you information. They don't say, you can't have this information. They say, this is the information I think you need on this particular subject to become a well-educated man on this subject. Now, they don't say, don't read this book, don't look at that movie. And that's what these churches do, many of them. Yeah. And that's a real problem. I'd like to read the little blurb I have about hijacking education at this point. They're requesting the churches, they're requesting more and more church members to ask for vouchers so that they can literally take their kids out of school and send them to religious faith-based schools. That's just one point of how they're hijacking education. They're trying to get their intelligent design taught in schools along with evolution, and where possible, challenging evolution itself in the classroom. Now, I'm talking about actually having church members stand up in the classroom and say, were you there? How can that be? It's challenging the teacher on this one subject. You notice that they don't challenge them on mathematics or physics or anything like that. Just that one subject. And if societies believe that they can find the answers to all questions in their holy books, why study anything else? H.L. Mencken, during his coverage of the monkey trial in 1925, listened to one woman preaching. She was a member of the Holy Rollers, which is what they called the Church of God back then. I'm sure you know. She was preaching against the readings of books in general. It seems a wandering book agent had stopped at her house, and she refused to touch any of the books, saying that if what was in that book was true, then everything in it is already in the Bible. If it was false, then reading it would imperil her soul. Remember, this was a religious leader saying, don't read anything besides the Bible. They obviously want you uneducated, or at least many of them do, and ready to believe anything they might want to tell you. In her book, Infidel, Ayaan Hirsi Ali said that in many African countries, some schools have already been taken over by Muslim fundamentalists that don't teach anything other than the Quran. And even that is taught in the original Islam. Language that many of the students did not speak. They teach you to recite it verbatim in the foreign language. You don't understand what it says until the teacher tells you in your own language.
Well, one of the problems that Christian colleges have had over the centuries is how, on the one hand, to teach their view, and that's okay to me, their view, and also present other views fairly. Now, that's the problem.
All right.
I taught in a college once in which the biologist came to speak to my philosophy class on Darwin, and he closed the door and said, let this stay inside this room. This was in a college. Now, this is not what a college is about. Now, I'm all for criticizing Darwinism or theism or any other view, because that's what thinking is.
If they can't stand up to criticism, they should fall.
So I would say, yes, open up. But first of all, you have to say, before you have a criticism of any view, you have to learn that view first. And that's hard work. As you and I know, listening, say we're married, listening is harder work than talking. And learning another person's viewpoint is hard work. But the best criticisms of another view are internal criticisms. When you're inside it and say, well, you say this, and they don't fit together. And that's what I find is a good criticism in my view. I say this, and I say that, and then somebody puts them together, and they don't seem to be consistent.
Yeah, but that particular type of reasoning, the criticism, the doubting itself, has been raised to the level of sin.
Oh, I've heard preachers say doubt is a
certain
sin.
Churches, just doubting itself is sin. It's the devil in you. You should not ask questions, and if you persist in it, you will lose your soul.
And that's saying thinking is a sin.
Yeah.
I mean, that's.
Which brings me to. Let's see now.
We don't want to forget to invite our callers.
Right. At any time, please feel free to call in.
By the way, before
long show, we still got a half an hour to go.
Let me recommend a good book.
Okay.
It's by Bernard Paris, called Heaven and Its Discontents. It's a study of John Milton's characters in Paradise Lost. And one of the characters he studies is the God character. And it's a very, very interesting book. I recommend it very highly. Now, I remember trying to read Paradise Lost in college. And it's incredible poetry, but exceedingly difficult. You got to work through it.
I guess so.
But it's worth it.
Yeah. That looks like you might be able to work through it pretty quick. It's not that big.
And it's exceedingly well read. It's a good commentary on the characters.
Okay, let me read a little blurb I have about Religion Hijacks Your Mind by hijacking logic, reason, and science. It does so not so much by claiming it as their invention, but by usurping it altogether, replacing it with faith. And by faith, I'm not talking about the little f faith of everyday expectations, but the capital F faith of religion, believing things without evidence and even in the face of contrary evidence. In the case of homosexuality, religions hijack science by attempting to pray away the gay. Religious groups claim ex-gay therapies have scientific merit, and it's been decades since electroshock therapy and other psychiatric interventions were routinely employed to treat homosexuality. These days, reparative therapy is more popular. It involves a combination of therapy, prayer to cure homosexuality. This, of course, has little or no actual effect on the condition. It only humiliates and subdues the subject into acting as if they were straight. But that counts as enough of a victory for many religious orders. In 2009, the American Psychological Association released a statement renouncing reparative therapy. It cited a dearth of scientific evidence supporting its efficacy and the likelihood that it may cause harm. When religious leaders can't sell you on the idea of blindly accepting religious faith, they will resort to defaming human reason itself. Martin Luther, the father of Protestantism, was one of the most famous of religious leaders of his time, and of all time, called reason a whore. Reason is the devil's greatest whore. Now, we're talking about the human capacity to think. By nature and manner of being, she is a noxious whore. She is a prostitute, the devil's appointed whore. Whore eaten by scab and leprosy, who ought to be trodden underfoot and destroyed. She and her wisdom. Throw dung in her face and make her ugly. She is, and she ought to be drowned in baptism. She would deserve, the wretch, to be banished to the filthiest place in the house, to the closets. Reason is the one thing that elevates us among the animals, and Martin Luther would have us turn a deaf ear to it, to deny it totally in favor of religious faith.
Do you think Luther needed to learn to express himself?
Yeah, he shouldn't hold himself back so much. While it is true that religious faith sometimes has its usefulness in hard times, people have relied upon it to get them through, but it should never be used to determine what is real. It may be useful, but it's never a reliable path to reality.
Yeah, what's interesting to me is just take theists, the believers in God, the enormous diversity among people. The same is true among atheists, but enormous diversity. So I don't want to get caught in the trap of saying, I don't want to say all atheists are immoral. You hear that a lot. I don't want to say.
How can they have moral?
And then the opposite absurd is if you're a theist, you're an idiot. And I think these are two extremes that don't match reality. There are all kinds of shades and degrees. Some of the smartest people I know in certain areas are theists. And some of the most wicked people I know are theists. And the same is true among atheists. So what I'm trying to say is I'm not so much worried about theism versus atheism so much as specifics. And when people have particular issues, like the gay issue, quoting a passage from the Bible doesn't directly deal with the issue at all. In fact, where did this hostility toward the people who are gays come from? Well, if you read the Bible carefully, it's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
They needed to generate as many kids as possible. And of course, gay people don't generate very many kids. Yeah. And so that's why you had the Catholic tradition for a long time in the hierarchy opposed birth control.
And still do.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting to me is if you think of, say, just the Catholic tradition or the Catholic Church as a corporation, they need more priests. They're running out of priests. So now the Pope has said gay priests are now permitted to be priests. Now
They've always been permitted to be priests.
Now not
officially, but they have.
Well, yeah. Now follow the logic here. The studies I've made, and I could be corrected on this, is that a person who's a gay man believes that he is inside female. He feels female, he thinks that way, he's emotionally that way. Now, if a gay man can be a priest, then that's just a short step to saying women can be priests.
Yeah. But I think it's an overgeneralization to say that all homosexual men feel like they're a woman.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't think that's actually the case. There's a big arcing gray area of how they feel. I mean, you've got some macho football players who don't particularly feel feminine, but they're homosexual. That's a good point to take a mid-program break, I think. If you're just tuning in to Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee, Freethought Forum is funded by them and by contributions. There should be one, I think.
Am I off the page here? Yeah. Well, you go ahead and take over.
Shows are live most every Tuesday from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, or Daylight Time, and Community Access TV. You can also see it streaming online outside of the Knoxville area by going to ctvknox.org.
Yeah, it's a call-in show, and we are alive like today, and at least we hope we're alive.
We're live.
And viewers can now call in the number on the screen, and we appreciate the callers.
We encourage it. The Atheist Society of Knoxville, or ASK, meets 2 times a week, and we have evening meetups for food, fun, drink, and conversation. ASK's purpose is to supply a venue for community, camaraderie, and outreach to the atheists, agnostics, freethinkers, and other like-minded persons in the East Tennessee area.
A lively round-table discussion, and first and third Sundays, as you point out, and potluck afternoon gathering and reflections on Sunday. So it's a good group, and it's a bonding.
Right.
People need to have other people who agree with them, and also who challenge each other.
True.
And have respect for each other.
Both the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee help provide a social outlet where that if you find that you don't believe in God, you'll also find that you're not alone. Sam, would you mind running the information videos on Asking RET?
If you live in or around the Knoxville area and are questioning your religious beliefs or simply believe in one less God than everyone else, well, you're not alone. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun and friendly group of people just like you that meets twice a week at a bar or restaurant. We meet every Tuesday night following the show at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria for happy hour. You'll find our group either inside or on the patio. Look for Richard Dawkins' silver-jacketed book, The God Delusion, standing upright on the table. On Fridays, we meet at Agave Azul or the Beard and Beer Market. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't. We all question what we believe at one point in our lives. If this is the time for you, come join us for food, drink, conversation, and fun. Do you find stories of talking snakes laughable? Do you prefer the scientific method over supernatural beliefs? Are you concerned about religious leaders and organizations imposing their values and rules on your body, your family, and the rest of our society? Well, take comfort in the fact that you're not alone. The Rationalists of East Tennessee meets weekly for fellowship and provides a forum for people who support skeptical thinking and rational discussion of these and other issues. To find out more information or to find out about our next meeting, visit us on the web at www.rationalist.org.
This is Freethought Forum, and the number at the bottom of the screen is open now for your calls. We were talking about how religion hijacks thinking, the human mind, logic and reason. I want to relay an anecdote. Back about 10 years ago, I was working up some audio for an Atheism 101 series that I was working on, and I had an acquaintance that I met every once in a while at a buffet that I go to for lunch. And he asked me what book I was reading, and it was Carl Sagan's Demon Haunted World, and I talked to him about it a little bit and told him that it supported atheism and that I was an atheist. And I said, here, I've got a CD. I wouldn't mind getting your opinion on this. You know, listen to this Atheism 101 series and let me know what you think as a believer. Well, I didn't see him for a couple of weeks, and he came back in 2 weeks later, and I asked him about the CD that I gave him. And he happened to have it with him and gave it to me. I said, well, what'd you think? He says, well, I gave it to my preacher and asked him what I should think about that. One, he never listened to it. And two, he let his religion hijack his thought process on the whole thing. And he asked his preacher what he should think about it. In other words, he let his preacher do his thinking for him. Never heard it. So, I mean, that right there is a shining example of how it takes over your thought processes.
Yeah, I can understand someone wanting to do this on plumbing, but even with a plumber, I want to ask questions.
Yeah, or buying a new car.
Yeah.
You walk around the car and kick the tires, nothing else. But for religion, if you were raised in religion, you stop questioning by the time you're 3 or 4 or 5 years old because you've just been told not to doubt and not to question. Yeah. And you don't do it anymore.
I often find it interesting how how someone could go through and hear sermon after sermon and never find any problems.
Yeah. Or if they do, they just take them home with them and never speak of them, because that's wrong. That's a sin.
I remember when I was a teacher, I would encourage my students to find what they regarded as problems or contradictions in what I was teaching, because part of that helps them to develop their thinking, and also if they see flaws in my thinking, that's to my advantage.
But you were encouraging thinking.
Yeah, in fact,
that was the difference.
Well, when you're in this way, you go to meetings to present papers, not only to give your views, some new view you've developed, but also you want to hear criticism. Because sometimes you say, well, maybe my view is ridiculous. And so you want someone to give you a criticism.
Especially in the sciences. What's the best way to make your name, and the quickest way to make your name in the sciences, is to successfully criticize the theory that someone else has put out, or especially a long-standing theory that everybody thinks is the right one. If you can successfully overturn that one, you may even win a Nobel Prize. But what happens in religion? Usually you schism and split off and start a new church. think about how science works. Over the ages, science has honed in more and more sharply on particular facts, no matter what the region of science it is, geology, anthropology, physics, any of that. They all come to where they agree more and more about the areas that they overlap. They have come to consensus on that worldwide. But what happens with the religion? Splinter, 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 and more people believe more and more different things.
Now, would you agree that in science that you often have revolutions or paradigm shifts?
Sure.
In other words, it isn't that science is simply accumulative, more and more knowledge, and it's all infallible along the way. No. Sometimes you come to a stage and you say, we didn't see it clearly, or we were mistaken.
Right. They were saying, a lot of people say, especially believers or religious fundamentalists, say that science always changes its mind. Well, it does for reasons, and it gets closer to the truth each time it changes its mind. Like, for instance, the Earth. We once thought it was flat. Okay, well, science at that time was wrong. It was round, we thought. So they discovered it was round like 2,500 years ago. And then they discovered that it was not really round, it was pear-shaped. And then they discovered that it's not really pear-shaped, it's an oblique spheroid of some type. So they're getting closer and closer to actual shape of the Earth.
Yeah.
And that's the way science does. It makes mistakes. It does say something's wrong and has to change its mind later, but it's always getting closer and closer to the truth.
And what we discover is that sometimes a century makes an enormous amount of difference in the way you. I mean, how many galaxies are there? I mean, we had no idea.
Right.
Now that we have the telescope in space, past generations before that.
Right. Technology alone in the last 100 years has allowed us to make leaps that we never could have made.
In the microscopic world, I mean, So what we're saying, I think, is that knowledge itself is a growing process, and there's my favorite book is called Conjectures and Refutations. We sometimes refute our own theories. Some of Darwin's theories,
and we should.
Some of Darwin's thinking was racist, and that had to be corrected. And he used his science to justify the cultural racism of that time, and we now say, no, that just doesn't fit.
Right.
And in other words, self-correction.
I like to think that if he was alive nowadays, he would see the error of his way.
I think he would.
Science doesn't support his old view, and would change his mind.
Yeah.
But think about
modern Darwinists do see that it's.
Yeah, and that's the problem with the religious book. It's not allowed to be changed. You can't go back and edit it without starting a whole.
Well, you know what's interesting is if you study the history of religion, the New Testament is a change.
Was a change.
But you can see changes from the Pentateuch, the first 5, to some of the prophets, to the book of Proverbs, Chronicles.
Sure.
And in fact, Chronicles corrects some of what's in Samuel.
Well, I think it needs to be changed more.
Well,
it hasn't been changed in like 2,000 years. It needs a new change, and it needs to get rid of some of those old, outmoded ideas that can no longer be supported. Like the idea of racism.
There are modern views of theism that, in many ways, are closer to naturalism than they are to, say, theism of the 18th century. I mean, in other words, both sides and some versions of theism have changed so much that they are not the same, except to say, well, it's like you are not 5 years of age. So are you the same person you were 5? And yes and no. But obviously your wife didn't marry a 5-year-old.
Yeah, but the problem is if the book doesn't change, you're going to get new generations of fundamentalists.
But what you get in religions, you have that book, but it takes human beings to interpret it, and that's why you have so many denominations.
Right.
It's finite mortals interpreting.
Right. One of the other things that, one of the many other things that religion hijacks is our sense of morality.
Yeah, let's talk about that, yeah.
Anything that is good is not good because of the benefits to society. It is good because God says it's so. One of the greatest tragedies of mankind, this is Arthur C. Clarke's quote, excuse me, one of the greatest tragedies of mankind is that morality has been hijacked by religion. So now people assume that religion and morality have a necessary connection. But the basis of morality is really very simple and doesn't require religion at all. It's this: don't do unto others, anybody else, what you wouldn't like to be done unto you. It seems to me that that's all there is to it.
And that was taught by mothers centuries ago.
It was taught by Confucius, this particular thing.
Long before Confucius,
long before Jesus.
teaching it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Even preschoolers have good intuitions about fairness, wrongness, harm done, and reparations needed. Morality is innate in our humanity. Yet religion tells us that morality is doing what the God of their holy book says. Morality is really doing what's right, no matter what you're told. But religious morality is doing what you're told, no matter what is right. Think about Abraham, Moses, and those.
Abraham thinking he's hearing the voice of God to slaughter his own son to prove he's faithful. Even in the book of Genesis, that's corrected.
Yeah.
I mean, that's ridiculous.
You know, what's funny about Abraham, I don't know how many people think about this, but when God said, kill your son, he says, okay. Yeah. But when God says he's going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, he's, well, wait a minute, we need to talk about that. He spends the afternoon trying to talk him down.
There was a case in California of some person sacrificing a child and so forth, and he was finally declared as mentally
incompetent.
Yeah, and either Abraham in the Bible is either mentally deranged or he's a pervert. I mean, there's no getting around that. Because, see, the problem is not that some people say, well, he didn't sacrifice it, but his faithfulness he was willing to. But that's why he's a pervert. If you're willing to sacrifice your child just because you hear a voice, that's what a perversion means.
Yeah.
Ethics is among animals. Have you seen this film of dolphins? Dolphins who got trapped in a net.
And other dolphins trying to help them out?
Well, in this case, other dolphins do. And in this case, some human beings, in a ship were able to release them. And there are pictures of the dolphins jumping up, as if they're saying, thanks. And what I'm suggesting is maybe it's just the sense of gratitude has animal roots.
I'm sure it does.
We know that compassion does.
That's the thing about the internet. You can go on right now, go to YouTube and look up animal gratitude or animal emotions, and just see example after example. It's not like we're like 100 years ago where the only thing that you can see is what's in your immediate surroundings, or on TV in the case of 50 years ago. But nowadays we have this is what I really enjoy talking about. We got the internet, which is an anthropological giant leap forward in human knowledge, because it was designed from the ground up to be impervious to a nuclear attack. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
ARPANET was at first it was just used with the military and colleges to be able to pass information, data back and forth from the experiments and stuff that they did, and of course for the military. But now it's a repository for human information that puts the Library of Alexandria to shame.
Oh, yes.
I mean, how many millions of books are out there now on the internet? The Library of Alexandria during its heyday had 1 million books. So, I mean, this is something that cannot easily be destroyed. Of course, the downside is that there's almost as much misinformation out there as there is information. But that's something we need to work on. We need to try to find a way to cut back on that.
Well, you mentioned morality, and what do you think of this? Morality is basically if-then. If you want to live with your fellow members of your species, if you want to live with them, and if you want to live with certain other animals.
And you want to create a flourishing society.
Then there's certain things you must do. And that's where morality. These are the rules and regulations. And they're not relative in the sense of you can one person's opinion, the other person's opinion. No, there's certain built-in structures that if you're going to have and you want a community, then certain things you must do.
Minimize harm.
Yeah.
One of the first things
Yeah,
that you need to
you have to cut down on killing.
allow human rights for your fellow man. Certain things that you grant each person in the society the right to have. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are pretty good ones.
So, and if you, language itself presupposes you reduce the level of lying. Because if you miscommunicate, you're not even using language to communicate.
Well, you're not.
And that's,
using it correctly,
in other words, by miscommunicating, you're already lying. And so, you can't have a community unless you control stealing
and murder, for sure.
and coveting. See, these are the so-called 10 Commandments.
Yeah, well, we
Coveting.
need coveting. If you're going to have a capitalistic society, you need coveting. That's what advertising's all about. But
I think this kind of coveting and that's mentioned in the New Testament or the Old Testament is a kind of thing of what we mean by envy. You've got something I'd like to have, and I'd like to knock you off so I can get it.
Have that particular thing,
Yeah,
rather than the one that I can buy over here from a store.
Yeah.
Yes, I can understand that.
So all of these, even thou shalt have no other gods before me, I think really grew out of, you're in this group, this clan, and you put this clan first. That's
Yeah,
And,
there's an old saying that says there's a razor line between patriotism and racism.
okay.
So you can take something like that a little too far.
That's what my mother used to say. You go to seed on it.
Yeah. Another thing that religion tends to hijack is our sense of spirituality. Any feelings of awe and wonder that you may get when in love, exploring the skies, or even holding your own baby in your arm. Religion says, oh yeah, that's ours. We did that. You can't have that without supplicating yourself to God through us, of course. In church, they use music, lighting, timing, and oratory to promote a sense of spirituality in you, a perfectly natural response to stimuli. Then they claim it's the Spirit of God manifest in you. The entire production from start to finish is choreographed to elicit just that effect. Then bammo switcho, it's not us, it's God moving in you. Michael Sherlock, in his article, Church and Hypnotic Manipulation, compares what happens to church to hypnosis, which he presents in 5 stages. Introduction, induction, deepening, suggestion, and then awakening. Sherlock goes on to say that Christianity, since its beginning, has employed various forms of psychological manipulation which is focused on reinforcing the beliefs of passive believers. It demonstrates that religion, as is also the case in politics, is not about truth, but rather it is about persuasion and manipulation. His article can be found on xchristian.net, if anybody wants to look it up. Getting kind of late in the show, I'd like to go on to the next one. Religion hijacks our capacity for self-healing. Homeostasis is a medical term that describes the body's ability to return to normal after an illness or injury. Religion claims that it is God, or a God-appointed healer, that heals you if you get better without medical attention, and blames the victim for lack of faith if you do not.
Often this is by giving God credit for everything. It's basically giving those in charge of the God talk and the
God's representative on
organization,
earth.
giving them a considerable amount of power and influence, and maybe more importance than they deserve. Let's take faith, hope, and love. There in the last verse of 1 Corinthians 13. These are human emotions and experiences and commitments. You can't have a community without faith, hope, and love. And it may be atheistic, it may be naturalistic, it may be polytheistic, it may be monotheistic. In short, if you're going to have a community, you've got to have trust, which is another word for faith. You've got to have hope, and you've got to have love. So
I was going to mention about the faith that you were talking about. It's the faith in your fellow man, or your faith in the community that you're residing in. Faith in the goodness of man.
And faith and reason have to go together. Otherwise, you're going to commit yourself to something that's very foolish. So reason or put it this way, wisdom and love have to go together. You can't love well without loving wisely. And reason without love is a computer.
Yeah.
It's not a person.
Right.
So all of these, faith, love, reason, all of these great values, they interact to make a person. And this is not a supernatural phenomenon. This is a natural phenomenon that we cultivate in our little children. We take kids and nurture them to develop trust
Right.
and hope. And of course, that's love.
And we also teach them what we know about the world and what they can expect from the world itself.
Yeah, in other words, you teach kids not to lie because you don't want them to deceive themselves also, let alone other people.
Right. And you can't do that easily.
So I don't know of any religions that dwell too long on morality toward animals. But you can see how, I think Billy Graham's, what was kind of funny in a way, Billy Graham said he couldn't imagine being in heaven without his dog.
Yeah.
But he could imagine being there in heaven without Muslims and Jews and atheists and others. He's got his dog there, but fellow human beings.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there's other hijackings we've not mentioned. The phone lines are open. Call in and tell us about them. Or you can call in and give us your take on the atheist church story we mentioned earlier in the show.
That was kind of interesting.
Yeah, we've got about 8 minutes left.
Could you say that atheism can be, in that Latin sense of the word, a religion?
Well, in the Latin sense of the word, yes, we can have brotherhood and community and bonding. And I hate to tarnish it with the, how a lot of people don't want to use the word atheism because of all the baggage.
I got you.
It's the same reason I'd rather not use the word religion when we're talking
I know
atheism.
what you mean, yeah.
But when you get right down to the scientific and Latin usage of the word, yes, I can see that. And I do think that it's a good idea for atheists to be able to get together, have communion, have time to sing together, to hear an enlightening story, a sermon of types, if you would. But I don't think that we need any of the dogma attached to a religion, no matter what kind of dogma it is. I think the Unitarian Universalists have been doing it pretty well.
Let's talk, if we got time, about indoctrination.
About 5 minutes.
Yeah, I think indoctrination is a good thing. However, what's bad about it is some people want one line indoctrination. Yeah. What real thinking is, to me, is indoctrinating yourself in this view, and this view, and this view, so that you can compare them and say, well, this makes some sense in this respect, and they're really solving some problems. These people with this group, I think you could take the theories of the atonement in Christianity, take it away from the theistic part, and apply it to the community, and you say these Christians really did some profound thinking on the question of forgiveness and grace. And now you don't need the theistic view, but they did do some profound thinking.
No, they had to have to produce as much of the works that they've done over the last 2,000 years.
And maybe atheists could learn from that. In other words, what I'm suggesting is we need to realize each group has developed thinking because they've got to live in the world and solve problems, see how they do it, and then learn what you can and reject what doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the problem with the thinking that the atonement and all that stuff, when they were talking or thinking and doing their writings about all of this, they were thinking in relation to the human in relation to God, and human in relation to sin and their soul and the afterlife. And there's a lot of profound thinking, yes, and it caused a lot of schisms in the church. But the thing about it is, we're at a point in humanity and anthropology, the story of man, at the point where we ask for proof on a lot of things. I'd like to ask proof of souls. There's no such thing as an afterlife.
that's
There's no
a
such
good
thing as a
clue.
soul.
Yeah, I did.
What about sin? There's no such thing as sin if there's no such thing as God. There's a lot of things like
Now,
that.
you would agree there's moral evil and moral harm.
You can trespass against your neighbor,
Yeah,
for sure.
that's
and
good.
You,
I like
you can
that. Yeah,
harm
'cause you
them
can.
greatly.
Yeah.
And you should not, of course. The thing
makes
about it is, many religious people are talking about objective morals. And about the closest we're ever going to come as mankind to objective morals is to pass laws, put them on the books, put them on the shelf, and point to them and say, those are our objective morals. Because as a society, we have to come together and we have to say, this is allowed, this is not allowed, and why, and give good reasons for that. And those laws will end up on the books, and that will be as close as we'll ever get to objective morals.
Well, I think you're right. One reason I think ethics is rooted in if-then. See the consequences of not having certain rules.
Right.
And see the consequences of having bad rules and why you have to modify and change them.
And if the consequence of having a bad rule or bad action is your soul is going to hell, then you should dang well prove that there's a soul and that there's a hell.
Before you spend all the pages on talking about nonsense.
And passing the law.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh, yeah. Well, would you agree then that ethics did start in animals trying to cooperate and work together, and then we...
I'll even go farther to say that morals, our earliest understanding of morals took place in the religions of the time. And I'm talking about way, way back in religions. And it served us well at that time.
Yeah.
But at this point, we don't need to be fed dogma to have ourselves.
It's like
act
medicine.
right.
We don't bleed people the way they used to in medicine. Some of medical practices in the past we don't accept anymore. We don't throw medicine all out the door. We say we constantly revise and improve.
Right.
And that's all I would ask about people who are theists. Revise and improve.
Right.
I have
And
friends
ask
who
for good reasons for doing so.
yeah. I have some theist friends who are Darwinists, and their theism doesn't bother me, because when it comes to the specifics, I don't see much difference between them and me, and even some of their politics is close to mine. I don't press it a lot, but I find that I get a lot of help from these people, and they're able to accept help from me. And I find with my atheist friends the same way. Now, both groups have people who can't communicate with each other, and that's a mistake. And now, okay, one more thing, if we got time.
About 30 seconds.
Yeah, compassion is so important.
Empathy.
It's empathy. Yeah, I like that word even better. To feel inside and think inside another person, and that takes heart and brains to do that.
Right.
Well, that's all I wanted to say.
No, I think it's great. It's a good point, and that's a good point to end on. It's time to start wrapping things up. Get out your pen and paper. This has been Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. We have been bringing you 3 years so far of free thought and going strong.
Yeah, so please give us feedback, if you would, in the mail at and the number is 865-272-9060, and Freethought Forum at yahoo.com. And don't forget our show here, or who was used to say shoe on TV? I can't remember.
Ed's something. Sullivan.
Yeah. It's on Tuesday at 5 o'clock.
And we would like to send our thanks out to Sam, Jonas, Larry, and Forrest. Larry, you're welcome. For technical support to the staff of CTV Knox and to all our callers. Remember, examine your beliefs. If those beliefs are true, then you have nothing to fear from examining them. And wouldn't you want to know if they weren't true?
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.